What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. It's not about the Dr. Vibe show today. It's about the upcoming 2018 Men's and Women's Summit on Masculinity happening 17th and 18th of November. But today we're going to focus on what's happening on the evening of November 17th. As you see, we have another great friend here today on the Dr. Vibe show, Warren Farrell. And I had the pleasure of meeting him verbally about 3 years ago when Warren was behind a great crusade, if I can use that term properly, the proposal for a White House Council on Boys and Men. And we had a great time there. And now he's going to be a special guest speaker November 17th at the Men's and Women's Summit on Masculinity. He's going to be spending a whole night talking about how we can help our boys, specifically about the boy crisis. Warren, it is a pleasure and honor to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And how you doing today?
I'm doing very well. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be with you too. Our last conversation, even though we didn't see each other, was really just a pleasure. So I'm looking forward to today.
Excellent. You know, I could spend so much time talking about Warren. I'm just going to do some highlights. He's been chosen by the Financial Times as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders. His books have been published in over 50 countries and 20 languages. He has interesting titles like Why Men Are the Way They Are, The Myth of Male Power, Why Men Earn More, The Startling Truth Behind the Pay Gap and What Women Can Do About It. I want to find a little bit about Warren. How did Warren get into this work? Was this something that you were always attracted to, or what was the process? What was the journey?
I was always attracted to women, so I suppose that helped a little bit.
That's a good start.
From 7th grade on, about so
there
anyway,
you go.
On a conscious level, and all seriousness, I was teaching at Rutgers University in political science, which was what I was doing my doctoral dissertation in, and the women's movement surfaced, and I started incorporating the politics of the women's movement into my political science classes at Rutgers. And my students got all excited, and they said, man, when you speak about the women's movement, you have a fire in your belly that is even beyond what you do with your normal teaching of political science. And so I was also doubling as assistant to the president of NYU, and I was able to persuade, as a result of a little bit of influence there, my dissertation committee to let me change my dissertation topic to something that was what they felt was just a fad, the women's movement, and I said was not a fad, that I felt that it was the beginning of an evolutionary shift in roles that we had to be dependent upon for survival. Women raise children, men raise money, and I said that as a result of, I said in developed nations, there would be an opportunity for men and women to not have such rigid roles, and so therefore it was not just going to be a fad, it was going to be an evolutionary shift. And they sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, you really believe that? You go ahead and do it. And so that got me doing my dissertation in this area, which led to my attending NOW meetings, which led to NOW was in a position where they were contemplating getting rid of men. And so they said, as potential members, and the compromise was me. If I could get the men into men's groups while the women were in women's groups, so the men wouldn't interfere with the women, and to be able to facilitate their awareness, they'd keep men in NOW, and if not, they wouldn't. And so I went ahead and started my first men's group, which were held in the same evenings that the women's movement people held there, what they called consciousness raising groups. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. Maybe I'm not getting over it. And so I started to, that was so successful, they elected me to the board of NOW, and that led me to starting the second and third of what became about 300 men's groups and about 200 women's groups, and that led to my speaking around the world on women's issues. And then one day at a board meeting, some of the board members were saying that they were in a dilemma because many of the NOW members were saying that after divorce, they wanted the women who were the NOW members wanted to be able to be with the children full time, or decide what was best for the children, including the possibility of moving out of state with a new boyfriend and having that boyfriend be a stepfather and go to a new school in a better neighborhood away from the biological father. And I said, whoa, from the little research I had done at that point, it seemed like when children didn't have their dads, that there was a real price to pay for that. But there was only, the divorces had not happened for a long time, and there was, not a lot of time that had, a lot of the children of divorce had not grown up. And so they said, well, why don't you research that to a greater degree? And I started to begin my research, but I was really hoping that they were right, that that women knew what was best for children, and children raised predominantly by moms did as well or better than children raised by dads. But I found that the more I dug more deeply into it, the more I found I was wrong. That that children, or that my instinct was right, that children do a lot better when they have about an equal amount of father to mother involvement, and especially after divorce, where there's such instability that children have to feel that they didn't have their dad abandon them, and when dads were bad mouthed, the boy especially suffered a great deal. And so as I began to articulate this, I could see the now members the now board backing off from me. And I finally said, well, what do you want? Do you want what's best for children, or do you want what's best for women? And I would think that women are loving enough and maternal enough to want what's best for their children. They said, well, we want women to have the choice. And I said, well, they have the choice to have children. And when they have that free choice to have children, with that free choice to have children comes the freedom to make sure that you do, from that moment on, your commitment is to do what is best for the children, not what is best for your continued freedom, unless you can combine that with what's best for the children. And so this sort of created a real schism between me and the board of Now. But it did free me. Once I knew that I was going to be losing, millions of dollars of speaking engagements and possible awards that I was up for, I started to realize that if that I wanted to be able to spend my life doing research that led me, that no matter what the research found was best for the next generation and for men and women, I could speak that freely rather than feeling that I had to worry about everything that I said. For fear that I would be politically incorrect.
It's interesting, and thank you for sharing some of that journey, how you started off with women, basically advocating for women, and through that organization, and as Warren is mentioning now, is a national organization for women, for those who are not familiar. Right. And then you transition. When you decided to leave Now, how hard of a decision was it to do?
It was a hard decision, and I really didn't leave Now for many years per se, but I did leave the board of directors of Now, which sort of coincided with my former wife becoming a White House fellow, and then I moved out to Washington, D.C. with her, sort of became a wife of a fellow, if you would.
Right.
And so that geographical coincidence after 3 years of serving on the board of Now led to my breaking from Now directly. Breaking from the board membership of Now. But I was asked when I came out to San Diego to run for vice president of the board of Now. I'm pretty much guaranteed that I could get that, and I decided I wanted to focus on what I began to feel was being neglected, which was boys and men's issues, and to be able to help put that forward. I was hoping to integrate it into the feminist movement, thinking that the feminist movement was about, wanting boys and men to really be respected and valued and that type of thing. And I've been very disappointed that it has deviated so far from its original purpose. I don't feel I've changed, even though many people feel I have. My original desire was for a gender liberation movement to free men and women from rigid roles of the past that were necessary during survival to more flexible roles for the future. That was always my desire, is my desire in the future. And what many people don't know is that when Betty Friedan, the major founder of the women's movement, when she wrote her second book, which didn't get much attention, called Second Stage, she said exactly that as well. That that unless men get more involved in fathering, not less involved in fathering, then women will not be free to rise up on the political ladders and rise up on the economic ladders unless they're not having children. And that's exactly what I feel is true. So I feel I'm in a sense just advocating what Betty Friedan advocated. And Gloria Steiner, who also was a friend of mine at the time, she used to say, what the world needs is more women at work and more men at home. And so I feel today what is happening with the women's movement with so much anti-male feeling, and saying that if Dr. Ford is testifying, she must be believed just because she's a woman, basically, and that does not serve women well. It's an insult to women to not ask them to have due process and to be as accountable as we ask men to be. And rather than jumping into the conclusion of believing who you wish to believe based on a combination of politics and gender, that we really have to sort of apply the same standards of due process to everyone.
Wonderful. Where did the journey of the boy crisis start? It sounds like there was some background there. How did the boy crisis journey start?
Yeah, really good question. When I was speaking around the world in response to foreign translations of Why Men Are the Way They Are, especially in Japan and England and Australia and places like that, I would often have teachers come up to me and say, Dr. Farrell, the boys are in my class are really having problems, more than girls. Have you paid any attention to that? And I was getting this message as early as 25, 30 years ago. And so that sort of, got my radar tuned in. And my sister said, some of the boys recently in the class are really doing badly. She was a teacher in elementary school. And I said, can you tell me more about that? And she said, well, Jimmy and John or, whoever it was, they were doing pretty well 6 months ago, but they've taken a deep dive and they seem depressed and I can't reach them like I used to. And I said, did anything happen with their family? And she said, actually, yes. The parents just got a divorce. And so I kept pressing her on that. Well, how involved was the dad? Well, I didn't ask that. She went back and checked that out. Well, dad is not very involved, but he wants to be involved. He just, the mom doesn't feel like wants to move to a new area, isn't interested in having him involved. And I started seeing the accumulation of that cause. And so so that led to me researching the boy crisis. And I eventually found that there were basically 10 causes of the boy crisis. But of those 10 causes, the most important single cause was minimal father involvement and no father involvement. And so I started looking at where that was happening and how and why. And I saw that in a big UN study that was done and found that boys were falling significantly behind girls in all developed nations. And so I started looking into what these developed nations had in common. And they had in common that once a nation was developed, they had the freedom to be able to allow for much greater amounts of permission for divorce. And they had the freedom to allow women to have children without being married. So I started looking at these two groups of women and found that it was when women had children after divorce and they had an equal amount of time with the fathers, and there was no dad loving, and the father and mother lived within about 20 minutes of each other, the children did reasonably well, not as well as they did in an intact family, but reasonably well. Then I went over and looked at the group of women who were single moms, who were not related to divorce. They just chose to be a single mom. And I realized, first of all, that 53% of women in the United States who are under 30 who have children without being married. And I don't have a big thing.
Hold on. What percentage?
53%
Wow.
of women under 30 in the United States who have children without being married. And so I don't have this big thing about being married or not being married, but I started looking more closely at that, and I found that either the women who had children without being married never knew or got the father involved at all, or they did, a smaller percentage lived with men at the time that they had children, but that those men only remained involved with the children for between 3 and 4 years. And those groups of boys, the children with minimal father involvement and no father involvement, they suffered more in over 70 different areas. Their sisters suffered more in most of those areas also. But the boys, the difference, one of the differences is that boys who hurt us. They hurt us and themselves. So as I started looking at the mass shooters, almost all of them are boys, not girls, and boys who have minimal father involvement or no father involvement. That is the primary characteristics of the mass shooters that I know were the ISIS recruits, and 3 sociologists, female, did studies of ISIS recruits. They never even asked about father involvement, but it came up so often in their interviews that they went back and asked it systematically and found that the lack of father involvement was the single biggest common denominator among all the ISIS recruits, including, by the way, the women. And then I started looking at our prisons, and we have thousands of women's centers in this country, and we also have thousands of men's centers, but the men's centers are called prisons. And 93% of the people in prison and jail are male. And then of that 93%, much more than 90% of our males who are in prison have minimal or no father involvement. And so I began to see that, the costs, the economic costs, to say nothing of psychological costs, the insecurities that as a result of lack of fathers feeding our ISIS recruits and so on. I just began to see, my goodness, we have a crisis here, and this is only 3 or 4 of the major danger areas. Lack of father involvement turned out to be the biggest single predictor of suicide, the biggest single predictor of dropping out of high school, and dropping out of high school was the biggest predictor of not being employed in your 20s, and so on.
Well, I can relate so much to this because I'm based here in Toronto, and I actually am the program coordinator of Canada's only father-focused family center.
Mm-hmm.
So everything you're saying, I understand, I get it, and we'll certainly have to chat offline. I'm sure you can help me, and more than me, the fathers that I help where I am. How did you partner up with Mr. John Gray for the boy crisis? Must be a story in itself.
It is. I moved to Mill Valley, California, and which is a community that's very well known for its arts and crafts and music, and it's the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and so on. And I started to get excuse me, the cold is haunting me. I started to get a sense that this was the community I wanted to live. I'm looking out at about 1,000 redwood trees now, and I live in a park, and I had this opportunity to do that. And so I moved up to Mill Valley, and then found out that John Gray also lived here. And so since we both had an expertise in male-female issues, I called him up and said, "You want to go for a walk?" And that was about 12 years ago, and we've been walking about once a week ever since, and they have become best friends. And John Gray and I have very different approaches to male-female issues. He says men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and he puts a great deal more focus on the biology of men and women being just inherently different. I acknowledge almost all the biological differences as starting points, but I see part of our biology as being the ability to adapt and the ability of neuroplasticity to be constantly changing our brains, including in this very conversation we're having now, or monologue in this case. But
I'm here. It's not a monologue. I'm here. I'm just steering the ship. You're driving the ship, Warren. No worries.
I'm sorry. I'm just mocking myself here.
No problem.
And so one of my philosophies is to do 3 things in life. One is to listen, the second is to listen, and the third is to listen. The only time I don't do that is when I'm being interviewed. But and so I just listen to John's perspectives, and they And I found that when they made a lot of sense in many areas, and I disagreed with them in other areas. And so over the past 12 years, we've had dialogues of, of friendship, but I think we both had an impact on helping each other understand the other one's perspective. And so we sometimes call ourselves an odd couple, that one comes from one part of the spectrum, and I was more in feminist mode, and anyone can change and do anything. But I'll tell you, the more I see the feminist movement be activated, the more I see that we went from "I am woman, I am strong" to "I am woman, I've been wronged," and that's really an enormous insult to the belief that women are strong if they're always going around and playing victim. And as the feminist movement hones victimhood as a fine art, that becomes anti-feminist from my perspective. And so, but John would say, I told you, when women get involved in the workplace, it's not going to be as easy as it looks. Women are going to be stressed out more easily. They're going to have their own demands and so on. And my initial response is they should have their own demands. We want them to contribute to the workplace. But now there's a sense on the part of many men that they're afraid to mentor women. They're afraid to be close to women. Many men are afraid to hire women. And that's exactly the opposite of what we as feminists wanted to have happen. And so I'm really feeling like I'm very fortunate that I have enough money to live with, that I have the freedom to be able to say what I feel will really benefit women and feminists in the long run, as well as boys and men.
Excellent. How long did it take you and John to complete the project?
I started about 11 years ago. John picked up more recently. He's a quicker writer than I am, okay. and he has. But in some ways, he started a long time ago, because the 5 chapters that he contributed to the Boy Crisis are the 5 chapters on ADHD, and he has been studying alternatives to prescription medications for maybe 20, 30 years. And so he had this wealth of knowledge that I couldn't even begin to touch on all of the ways that you can, if you have an ADHD child, that you can have the child get rid of ADHD, but without taking drugs and therefore substituting one solution for another set of problems.
Wow. What was the initial reaction when the book came out?
The initial reaction was extremely positive by conservative media, and very fascinating by liberal media. That is, CBS News said this is really a phenomenal book, and they passed it off to a producer, and then they had a host chosen, and they were ready to interview me, and then all of a sudden it got stopped. And then the Atlantic Monthly, or Atlantic magazine, had expressed a strong interest on the part of 2 editors, and then all of a sudden it got dropped. Newsweek had scheduled an op-ed I did. They scheduled it 4 times, then rescheduled it, and all of a sudden it got dropped. And so what experience is in life is when that happens, when a few producers read something and then all of a sudden and agree and schedule it, and then all of a sudden it gets dropped. And usually one producer speaks up and says, this guy is preventing women from having freedom to do whatever they want to do in terms of raising children. I don't want anything to do with him being here. If he gets on, and they put up a stink, and then everybody else backs off and says, well, maybe we don't want to be associated with this. However, that said, just recently, the USA Today did finally publish an op-ed that I did last Monday. And just yesterday, the New York Review of Books, which is both intellectual and liberal, published a review that was quite positive on the Boy Crisis book. And so that's the first 2 breakthroughs in the liberal media. Well,
congratulations. I know our time is tight, but I have someone here, Dr. Tachi, who's a regular of the Dr. Vibe Show. It's a great question, and I hope we can fit it in. She's saying, in regards to women in the workplace, do you think that the resistance from some men lies in uncertainty about the actual ability as opposed to birthright ability?
No, I think many men, certainly some men, are traditional men who, 20, 30, 50 years ago, just had no experience of women in the workplace and had their stereotypical vision of what it was like. But my former wife was when she was a White House fellow. She worked in the Department of the Treasury under George Shultz, and the Treasury Department was known as the most conservative male chauvinist place in the government. And one of the things that she pointed out was, when she did her work and she did it well, these very traditional men went like, "Wow, all right, you're good," and they sort of like they each competed to be her champion because every man wanted to see women doing well, but some of the men just didn't have the life experience, especially if they were traditional men, to know that they're a judge, let's say, or a lawyer. They worked 78 hours a week, and they tended to marry women who were in the home, and they selected for that type of woman, and therefore didn't see and they got involved in neighborhoods that had that type of women and men. And so they didn't see another world as quickly as many of the rest of us did, and especially as quickly as many women who are very bright and competent are able to see about themselves.
Excellent, excellent. That is really good. So on the 17th, you're going to be here in Toronto. Could you give our audience a high-level view of what you're going to be doing on the 17th, changing not only the lives of the leaders that will be there, but also, at the end of the day, changing the lives of our boys?
Yes, absolutely. So there's two things. On the 17th, I'm talking largely to leaders, and then on the 18th, I'm talking to at the summit, Men's and Women's Summit on Masculinity, and they each have very important purposes. So at the leadership group, I want to be able to help male leaders understand how they can move through the biological resistance to being empathetic to men and boys. When I say the biological resistance, what I mean is that historically speaking, the way that you became a man is to be trained to be disposable. If you disposable in war and to be disposable in the workplace and the hazardous jobs, and if you're trained to be disposable, that forces the people who love you to keep you at a psychological distance, to not care as much. Our job was to protect women and children who were more vulnerable than we were, and to be willing to die before a woman was hurt. And so, if we have that resistance to hearing men's issues and boys' issues, we have to know how to move through that resistance, because ultimately, when only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And we're all in the same family boat. This is not about oppressors versus oppressed. So the first thing that I'll be doing is training the leaders to introduce to their audiences how they can see men and boys and their fathers not as oppressors, but that the money that they made, which feminists say is about male privilege or male power, that the money they made was actually the discrimination against men. It was part of their role to be pressured or expected, if they're going to be a father, to have to make money and do jobs they liked less that would provide more money. That is, the more fulfilling an occupation is, the less it pays. So many men gave up jobs of being teachers to be administrators or to sell insurance. We seem to have a problem. Maybe I'm being censored?
No.
No, I'm just playing.
Not at all. It's your show.
No, I'm just joking. No, I didn't mean that I was being censored. I seem to be getting static. And
yeah, I'm getting a little bit of static, but I can still hear you.
Okay, that's fine. I was just playing about the censorship. So what I'll be doing is teaching the leaders how to set up the experiences that the audience can go through, such as, for example, I'll be asking them to do an experience of getting in touch with the glint in their dad's eye. And once they get in touch with the glint in their dad's eye, to compare what the dad was doing when he had the glint in his eye to what he actually did for a living. And then examine when they see the difference, to sort of see which would have made more money: playing with your grandchildren, fishing, golfing, doing model airplanes in the garage, just flying a small craft plane around the world just to enjoy the mountains and the scenery, or being an accountant or selling insurance or doing whatever they did to make a living. And 90 some odd % of the time, most of the people in the audience will realize, well, gee, I guess my dad realized that selling insurance or being a national salesperson for tires rather than a local salesperson where he could come home every night, that being a national salesperson was something he needed to do once he became a dad. And so that so they can introduce to their audiences the obligations that men felt and fulfilled when they were responsible dads, and that to take the men who fulfilled their obligations so that their children could have a life that was better than theirs, and then turn that against them and say, aha, you made more money, that's because you were you have male privilege and male power and you're discriminating against women, is to completely miss the understanding of what men contribute to the world, or have contributed to the world.
How has the boy crisis, or what areas of the boy crisis have changed, stayed the same, or gotten better since you started this journey?
I would say that two things have happened with boys. Fathers have gotten, there's a group of boys whose fathers are so much more involved than my father, and especially my father's father, were ever involved. And you can see this on any weekend day when you go to the park and you see fathers really involved in chasing the kids around the playground, or go into a supermarket and you see a dad throwing a box of Cheerios into the shopping cart, making the shopping cart into a basket and the box into the equivalent of a basketball, and having looking over the nutritional percentages on the back of a package and doing math with the kids through those nutritional percentages. You see dads much more involved. My son-in-law is constantly roughhousing, playing, teaching my grandson. So that's wonderful. And those boys are doing very well. Most of them make me at that age look like, pretty bad. And then there's this huge gap among boys who have, boys usually have divorces, who have been told that their fathers have abandoned them, have been told their fathers are irresponsible and liars, and then they look in the mirror and the boy feels like, well, gee, if dad is narcissistic, irresponsible, and a liar, maybe that's the way I am too, and they begin to get a low self-concept. They don't have the benefit of all the things that in the Boy Crisis book I discuss. I've identified 10 different areas between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. I think that's one of the most useful parts of the book, because the types of things that dads do that lead to children doing so much better when they're involved is what is completely not understood. And because guys don't read books like The Boy Crisis or parenting magazines, they don't explain this to their wives. They don't explain, for example, why roughhousing, when combined with boundary enforcement, leads to children having more empathy for their brothers and sisters, leads to children understanding the difference between being assertive and aggressive. And so men don't articulate this to their wives. So when their wives watch them roughhousing, the wives are just saying, oh man, it's just like, I feel like I had just one more child to monitor here.
Yes, exactly.
And then the mom is saying in the back of her mind, well, I want to be a good mom. I don't want to interfere, but I do feel that sooner or later they're going to hit their heads, or somebody's going to end up crying, and she's about 100% likely to be right. And then she feels guilty that she didn't interfere ahead of time to prevent that from happening to begin with. And then, to her shocked amazement, the father just goes ahead and continues the same type of roughhousing that led to the head being hit and the children crying to begin with. And she has she concludes that the dad is irresponsible. It's just basically the kid to monitor that she thought about, because dads don't explain that what they're doing is when they roughhouse, they create a bond with the child. When they create that bond, they have the ability to use that bond to be able to say to a child, okay, if you don't pay attention, if you hurt your sister like this, if you hurt your brother by pushing him aside or elbowing him while we're wrestling, then we're going to stop the roughhousing. And the kids go, okay, Dad, we'll do that. And then they continue the roughhousing, and sure enough, the kids forget about their vow to not, push them aside, because the kids are experiencing what psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire. Once you're excited, you forget about all the vows to think to think of your brother and sister and to be empathetic. You want to be the first one. You want to be the kingpin and pinning your dad down in your wrestling match. And so Dad throws the kids on the couch, and the kids jump back on his back, and they try to turn him over, and Dad tries to prevent going over, or pretends to try to prevent going over, and then the kids treat each other that way, and then Dad says, "Okay, I warned you that if you continue that, Jimmy, you just hurt John again, and I warned you about that, so no more roughhousing till tomorrow night." So he gives them a small consequence, but the consequence is enough to make them, the next time they get the warning, to stop to be considerate of others. They are being forced now, or strongly encouraged, that they have an incentive to pay attention to their sister or brother's needs and feelings, which is the beginning of stimulating and catalyzing empathy. So children who do the roughhousing have a much deeper bond with their dad. They're much more likely to pay attention to the boundaries that dad set, and dads are much more likely to enforce them. That enforcement of boundaries teaches the children not only empathy, but the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive. And if a mom says to the child, don't do this, and then the child will, in an excited moment, go right back in doing it. And moms will be much more likely to say, "I told you not to do this. Didn't I tell you a few minutes ago not to hurt your younger sister like that?" And so moms get very disconcerted when they see dads, and they go, "I don't get it. I've told the children the same thing that my husband has told the children, but when he says it, they pay attention to him. I have to repeat myself 100 times, and they still don't pay attention to me. Why is that?" And why it is because the dad has that bond, and then he enforces the boundaries, and he makes the children have a consequence that he enforces without having to repeat it again and not warning again. And he sends the children back into roughhousing after he's given that warning. Why? Because that's the way they learn to think, to understand what the difference is between being assertive versus being aggressive, and what empathy means, and what considering somebody else's families mean. That children don't learn those nuances by a lecture. They learn that nuance only by experience.
Wow. Right after those last few minutes, why don't you want to come to Toronto on November 17th and 18th? Like, I'm telling you, that right there, that was outstanding. We have already come to the end of our epic conversation, and I just like to say, before Warren gives his contact information and etc., when Warren and I were first on the show together, we closed it off by giving a blessing. And we were on with Glenn Barker from the Mankind Project, and also Dr. Marvin Thompson, an educator. And I was speaking with Glenn recently, and when I mentioned that you were going to be on the conversation, he said, "Dr. Farrell really liked that." And before we went on live today, I asked Warren if he'd like to do that again, and he said he'd be more than happy. So since you are the guest, I will let you do the blessing of me first.
Great. What I feel when I feel you, both verbally and in being able to see you, is I feel this warm spirit. I feel this person who's both a strong mind, but is also just so much from the heart. Somebody who, rather than someone who just sort of says, "I'd love to do this in life," has a sense of efficacy, who goes out and actually does it. And so, and who doesn't just sort of like have the type of ego that runs a show, but rather is a facilitator and bringing out the best that he can in his guests. I find you to be to have done your homework well enough to ask questions that are relevant and very facilitative. And then after you do that, I find you listen really well. And I found myself very relaxed in the space of being able to share with you.
Thank you so much. I could take half an hour, but I'm going to take probably about 45 seconds. Warren, It is an honor and pleasure to be in your presence, whether it's over a phone line, over a monitor, and soon to be face to face, to take the leap of faith, because I know some of this is faith, because I can relate now that this is work. And we have to say thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will be doing in the area of strengthening our boys. This is my platform, and I will say that the better men that we have in our lives, the better our society is going to be. And I know some people will push back on that, but our men and males of today were once boys. So we have to start at the beginning. And for you to realize this need, this passion, this work, and your deep thought and your caring and your evaluated experience is a blessing to me. And I know a blessing to people who are watching this, people who may not be watching this. There are people in our line of passion, because I don't call it work, that will be affected for hundreds of years to come. And I will say 2 words: don't quit, or I'll come after you. So, well, Warren, looking
maybe
forward.
I'll pretend to quit so you'll come down and visit me.
Absolutely. I don't know if I'm going to stay down there. Well, that's another conversation. If people want to find out more information about the boy crisis, about yourself, what can they do?
If you're a supporter of independent bookstores, then go to an independent bookstore and order the Boy Crisis from them. If you're needing to make sure you save some money, Amazon right now has the Boy Crisis on a sale of about more than a third off, or about a third off. So just go to Amazon and order the book quickly from there. Or go to my website to find out more about it, either warrenfarrell.com. That's not Will Ferrell, the comedian, but Warren Farrell.
Yes.
.com. Or there's a website specifically for theboycrisis.org. And so, if you go to the warrenfarrell.com website, my email is on there. I answer every single email that I get. And so I'd be just delighted to hear, what your experience with the Boy Crisis is, but specifically make sure that you focus on the differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. Second, spend time on how to build family dinner nights so they don't become family dinner nightmares. And if you're a single mom, look at the chapters on what single moms can do to bring the best of father and male role models into your life, whether it's the Mankind Project, whether it's the Cub Scouts or the Boy Scouts, whether it's a faith-based community, or whether it's persuading your school to have more male teachers. Boys need women who are wonderful role models, and they need dads as well. But negotiating that process is one of an enormous amount of listening to women and what they have to offer, and then asking women to listen to you and seeing what you as a dad has to offer.
Wonderful. Here he is over the screen, but please, if you're in Toronto, catch him live. And also there's an online offering. But first things first, the Men and Women Summit on Masculinity, November 17th and 18th in Toronto. It's a co-ed event. The Sunday has 7 speakers, which is a co-ed event. There's a vendor area for you to meet top men's organizations in Toronto. You can leverage the summit as a resource to transform yourself and your community, and you can connect with like-minded men and women, and probably meet a wonderful like-minded man like that right there during the summit. If you want to find out more information about the summit, just go to the website www.menandmasculinity.com. I am Dr. Vibe. I'm going to be your MC for the Saturday night, which I'm only going to probably be on the stage for 2 minutes because it's Warren's night, and then all throughout Sunday. So we'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen or watch this, and we look forward to seeing you in Toronto. Oh, I forgot one other thing. If you can't make it for the summit on Sunday, you can also attend it online. So go to the website, catch it. Thank you so very much. As we like to say, God bless, peace be well, keep the faith, and walk good. Take care, Warren, and looking forward to seeing you in Toronto.
I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks.